If you had just 24 hours to leave the United States, where could you actually go? Not just to visit, but to live, work, and have an actual solid exit plan if the situation in the US gets any worse. Well, I've gotten countries where US citizens can land tomorrow with no prearranged visa, no job offer, and no massive investment required. You get 6 months to a year on arrival, and some let you work remotely, and a few even offer direct paths to EU citizenship. So I'm going to walk you through all of them in this video with the exact income requirements, how long you can actually stay, and which ones are real long-term landing pads versus temporary escape routes. And stick around until the end because one of these countries has a 70-year-old treaty that only US citizens can use. So Albania gives US citizens a full year of visa-free entry. You just show up, you get stamped in for 365 days, and you're legal to stay. No application, no fees, and no paperwork before you arrive. You need about the equivalent of $700 a month to live comfortably. They don't require you to give any official proof at entry. But if you are planning to stay the full year, you will need to show that you can support yourself if questioned. And the great thing is that US citizens can legally work remotely in Albania during their visa-free year. Albanian law grants Americans the same employment rights as local citizens, so you would be covered for remote work without needing to have any additional permits. Now, after your year is up, you would need to leave Albania for 90 days minimum before you can return for another year. But while you're over there, you can also apply for a residency permit if you want to stay longer without leaving. And this temporary residency permit needs you to provide proof of income, health insurance, and either a lease or property ownership. And that temporary residency permit runs for 1 year, and it's renewable. And after 5 years of continuous legal residency, you'd be eligible to apply for Albanian citizenship if that was something you wanted. Cost of living here is legitimately cheap. You're looking at around $700 a month for a single person. Keep in mind that the Adriatic coast is more expensive during summer, but it's still going to be below typical Western European prices. So, what's the catch here? Well, Albania isn't in the EU or Schengen at the moment, so this doesn't give you broader European access. It just gives you proximity. It's a landing pad for Albania specifically, but it's not a gateway to the rest of Europe. What it does do is give you time and affordability if you need to get out of the US really quickly. But there's another year-long option which has even better tax treatment and a thriving digital nomad scene. Let's take a look at that one next. Georgia uses territorial tax system. So if you spend over 183 days in country and become a tax resident, you would only be taxed on Georgian source income with foreign income being tax-free. And there's a 1% entrepreneur rate which applies to individual entrepreneurs with small business status who are earning up to the equivalent of approximately $180,000 US per year. And Georgia is also one of the only countries where the US State Department has confirmed that leaving and re-entering the country resets your 365-day clock. So you could technically stay in Georgia indefinitely by doing these visa runs every year, although I would recommend consulting with a tax professional if you're planning to do this long term. And if you want to formalize your stay, you could also register as an individual entrepreneur in Georgia, which takes about a week, costs around $100, and gives you a renewable residency permit that counts towards permanent residency after 5 years. Georgia has recently become a hub for digital nomads and tech workers, so there's solid infrastructure in place and co-working spaces in major cities like Tisia and Batumi. One detail worth noting is that Georgia has a favorable tax environment for crypto. So if you're an individual but not a business who's holding digital assets, then Georgia currently doesn't tax those gains. In short, both Albania and Georgia are great options because they give you a full year to figure things out. But the downside is that neither one is particularly close to home if you're in the US. And if you want something more familiar where you can, quickly return to the US in a few hours, then the next country on the list is an obvious choice. Now, we're going to look at the 6-month options, and starting with Canada. So in Canada, a US national can get 6 months on arrival as a tourist without any need for a visa. And according to the 2023 Tech Talent Strategy, Remote work for a non-Canadian employer is allowed during this period, so you can stay there for up to 6 months and carry on working remotely for your US or other foreign employer as long as it's not Canadian without needing a work permit. But you can't work for a Canadian employer or Canadian clients or any Canadian source income without getting the proper authorization. So the catch here is that Canada doesn't really offer an easy long-term path for those who are working remotely. Yes, you can apply to extend your visitor status, but there's no guarantee of approval. And in reality, most permanent residency pathways tend to favor candidates with Canadian work experience or job offers. And without a Canadian employer sponsoring you, your options narrow very quickly. And of course, tax residency is another concern here. If you stay for 183 days or more in a calendar year, then Canada may consider you a tax resident. So you would owe Canadian taxes on your worldwide income. And you got to be careful because even shorter stays can trigger tax residency if you establish significant ties like renting a home long term. So definitely get tax advice if you're thinking of going down this road. So Canada is a useful escape for short-term proximity. But there's actually another option almost just as close that gives you a path to permanent residency and costs half as much to live there. So next up, we have Mexico, which gives U.S. citizens stays of up to 180 days on a tourist card, although the immigration officer does have discretion and may give you fewer days based on what you tell them your plans are. So remote work on a tourist visa does exist in a gray area. Technically, it's meant for just tourism, but many digital nomads do carry on working remotely for foreign employers without issues for short stays. But if you do become a tax resident, which normally happens at 183 days in a calendar year, or if Mexico becomes the center of your vital interests, then you may be taxed on your worldwide income. And if you do want to stay longer than 180 days, you'd need to apply for a temporary residence visa, and you could actually apply for this at a Mexican consulate with proof of either $3,500 to $4,000 a month in income for the past 6 months, or a minimum of $70,000 in savings. And this visa is good for 1 year, and you can renew it for up to 4 years in total. And then after 4 years on this temporary residency visa, you can then apply for permanent residency. So you can live in Mexico indefinitely, work for Mexican employers, and eventually apply for citizenship after 5 years of permanent residency. In terms of cost of living, Mexico's prices vary quite widely. In places like Mexico City, Pier del Carmen, and Tulum, you're looking at between $15,000 to $25,000 a month. But smaller cities can be done for $1,000 to $1,500 a month. And Mexico is the closest option to the US on this list that also offers a clear path to permanent residency, which matters if you've got family, business ties, or if you just want to stay within a few hours' flight of home. The infrastructure in major expat hubs is pretty decent. You can find English speakers in tourist areas, and healthcare is good quality and affordable. Mexico gives you permanency options if you commit. However, if you want 6 months somewhere English, speaking with zero paperwork, then here comes the next most obvious choice, the United Kingdom, where US citizens can get 6 months in the UK visa-free. And since January 2025, you would need an electronic travel authorization before heading to the UK, which is similar to the ESTA system that is in place for foreigners entering the US. But it's a simple online application that costs $16 and it lasts for 2 years. And interestingly, as of January 2024, UK immigration actually clarified that incidental remote work is okay on a tourist visa, meaning that you can do things like check emails, attend virtual meetings, or work remotely for a non-UK employer during your stay as long as this isn't the primary purpose of your visit. But you cannot work for UK companies, UK clients, or do anything that would look like you're entering the UK labor market. And unfortunately, you can't extend the 6-month period. When it's up, you have to leave. And keep in mind that while this visa technically allows up to 6 months, if you stay longer than 90 days, it may trigger increased scrutiny from UK border officials. They're likely to ask more questions about the nature of your remote work and whether you're effectively living in the UK rather than visiting. And if you keep coming back for more stays, it can increase the risk of refusal at the border. So be careful about that. Be careful about the UK doesn't have a digital nomad visa at the moment, and it doesn't have any plans to introduce one as far as I know. So if you do want to stay longer than 6 months, then you would need a work visa sponsored by a UK employer or a student visa or family ties. So the UK works as a landing pad. If you want to spend up to 6 months in a safe country where everyone speaks English, there's strong infrastructure. It can be a good place to land while you figure out your next move. But it's not a longer-term solution than that unless you can get that work visa or you have those family connections. But there's another interesting option, and this one is in the Americas, and it has the same 6-month entry, but a much clearer path to staying there permanently. Next up, Panama, which is becoming an increasingly popular destination. It gives U.S. citizens 180 days visa-free on arrival. Remote work is legal, and the country operates on a territorial tax system, so your foreign-sourced income isn't taxed. And if you want to stay longer, Panama offers two straightforward paths. So the first one is the Digital Nomad Visa, which was launched in 2021. To get this, you need to prove minimum of $36,000 in annual income from a remote job or business. And that gives you 9 months to start with, and then you can renew it for another 9 months. The application fee is $300. But the second option, and one that's a lot more powerful, is the Friendly Nations Permanent Residency Program. If you come from one of about 50 countries, including the U.S., then you can apply for residency in Panama through one of three routes. Firstly, securing employment with a Panamanian company, investing at least $200,000 in real estate, or depositing $200,000 in a fixed-term account at a local bank and holding it there for at least 3 years. So this process first grants you 2 years of provisional residency, and after that you can apply for the permanent residency. So you're looking at a total timeline of approximately 3 years from start to permanent residency, which is pretty short, to be honest. Panama uses the US dollar as its currency, so you're not going to have to deal with exchange rate risk. Cost of living in Panama City runs around $2,000 to $2 and $1,000 a month for comfortable living. And outside the capital, you can live comfortably for $1,500 to $2,000 a month, depending on what your definition of living comfortably is. And Panama's location makes it a strategic hub for more travel throughout the Americas. Having the US dollar makes finances more simple, and the country offers a nice blend of modern city life in Panama City and also various mountain retreats and Caribbean beaches. So Panama offers this clear residency path in the Americas. But if your real goal is Europe, then there's one country that offers a 3-year digital nomad visa, and it's genuinely accessible: Spain, which launched its digital nomad visa in 2023. And this allows people who work remotely to apply for a residency permit in Spain. So first off, you need proof of at least $2,760 per month, or the equivalent of, which is 200% of Spain's minimum wage as of 2025. So there's two ways to apply. You can do it from outside Spain at a consulate, which would most likely be in the US. And this gives you a 1-year visa that you can then convert to a 3-year residency permit on arrival. Another way in, and this is probably more suitable if you're looking to get out of the US quickly, is to enter Spain as a tourist on the 90-day Shannon Agreement, and then you can apply in-country for a 3-year residency permit directly. And the in-country application is allowed specifically for the digital nomad visa. And that's quite unusual because most EU countries actually make you apply for these visas back in the US at one of their consulates there, like Portugal, for example. So this is very convenient if you're looking to get out and to stay out and establish that longer-term living situation. So what can you do on this visa? Well, first off, it allows you to work remotely for non-Spanish employers and non-Spanish clients. You can also earn up to 20% of your income from Spanish sources, which does give you a bit of flexibility if you decide that you want to take on some local freelance work. Spain also offers the Beckham Law, as they call it, for new residents, and this can significantly reduce your tax burden for the first 6 years. You pay a flat 24% on employment income earned in Spain up to $600,000, and foreign passive income like dividends, rental income, and capital gains will be exempt from Spanish tax during this period. But if you are employed and working remotely while in Spain, then that employment income is taxed as if it was Spanish sourced. So the Beckham Law is mainly beneficial for employees rather than freelancers or self-employed individuals. If this is your situation, Make sure you consult a tax advisor for specific advice on this because it's really important to do that. So after 5 years of legal residency in Spain, you can actually apply for permanent Spanish residency. And after 10 years, you're eligible to apply for Spanish citizenship. But Spain does require you to renounce your U.S. citizenship to become Spanish. And this is the legal requirement. But the practical reality is a little bit more nuanced. So Spain only requires a declaration of renunciation. Many people choose to navigate this differently. Most people maintain permanent residency status indefinitely rather than pursuing Spanish citizenship for this reason. But again, if in doubt, then you should definitely speak to a Spanish immigration lawyer to find out what the options might be for you with this. So Spain's digital nomad visa is definitely one of the strongest and most appealing options on this list if you want EU access and a clear path to permanent residency, plus all the lifestyle benefits of living in Spain. But there is a 70-year-old treaty in another very popular EU country that lets you get started with just $4.5 thousand equivalent in total. So you may not know this, but the Netherlands has a treaty in place with the US that dates back to 1956, and it's called the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty, or DFT. And this allows US citizens to get a Dutch residency permit by starting a business in the Netherlands with a minimum investment of $4,500. So you just register a business, deposit the funds into a Dutch business bank account, and apply for a residence permit as a self-employed entrepreneur. The permit is issued for 2 years initially, and you can renew it as long as you maintain the business. You do need to actually run the business. It's not just a case of dumping that money in the bank and forgetting about it, but it's quite flexible with what the business can be, so you can do consulting, freelancing, or any legitimate commercial activity. There are many U.S. citizens that use this to work remotely as contractors while living in the Netherlands. And after spending 5 years as a resident on the DAFT permit, you can apply for permanent residency of the Netherlands. Keep in mind that in 2025, there's a proposed law going through Parliament that wants to extend the citizenship requirement from 5 years to 10 years, although that wouldn't take effect before 2027, and it would not be retroactive as far as we know at the moment. Also important is that the Netherlands doesn't usually allow dual citizenship with the US in most cases. So you would likely need to renounce your US citizenship if you actually wanted to become Dutch. And the exceptions are if you are married to a Dutch person or in a registered partnership with a Dutch citizen. And because of this situation, most U.S. citizens who are DAFT holders actually apply for permanent residency rather than pursuing citizenship because that lets them keep their U.S. passport and gives them more options. Keep in mind that the cost of living in the Netherlands is quite high. In Amsterdam, you're looking at a minimum of probably $3,500 a month, if not more. And smaller cities are going to be slightly cheaper than that, but it's still definitely not a low cost of living country at all. The DAFT treaty is really interesting, and it's one of the most underutilized immigration tools available to Americans who want to move to Europe, and gives you EU residency, access to the Schengen zone, and a path to permanent residency in one of Europe's most stable countries. All for just putting $4,500 in a bank and being willing to run a small business. So there's one more EU option where you can actually qualify with just savings as an alternative to income. You don't need to run a business, and you pay zero tax on your foreign earnings for 18 months. So let's check that one out next up. So, Croatia, very interesting case. In 2025, very recently, Croatia extended its digital nomad permit to a whole 18 months, which makes it one of the longest stays in Europe for non-EU remote workers. And you can work either as an employee for a company, but it must be registered outside Croatia, so a US company would be fine, or you can run your own business. But again, that must be registered outside of Croatia. As a US citizen, you can enter visa-free for 90 days, as in other Schengen countries, and you can then apply for the digital nomad permit either online or at a local police station in person while you're already in the country. So that gives you the potential for a 21-month stay without ever leaving, 90 days as a tourist, and then up to 18 months on the digital nomad permit. So you could get it for the full 18 months up front, or sometimes it's granted as a 12 months permit with a 6-month extension that you can apply for at least 60 days before expiry. And the minimum income requirement here is $3,295 per month. But if you don't have regular income like that, but you have savings, then this is an interesting option because you can show proof of $59,300 or the equivalent in dollars in savings to cover the full 18 months. So if you want to go down this road, you need to bring along 6 months of your bank statements or pay slips. I have a health insurance policy that's valid in Croatia and a criminal background check from the US, which you should be able to get from the FBI. But the standout benefit here is the tax exemption. So under this permit, Croatia doesn't tax foreign employment or business income. However, and this is important, passive income like investments, dividends, or rental income may still be taxable in Croatia. Again, speak to a tax advisor about this. You're still responsible for your U.S. tax return as you have to do every year, but you wouldn't face Croatian income tax on your remote work earnings. But there is a catch. There always is, right? This permit is not renewable back to back. So after 18 months, you must leave Croatia for 6 months before you can reapply. And that waiting period breaks up your continuous residence. So you could not use this as a path to permanent residency. But if you need an extended European stay with some excellent tax benefits, and you know how to spend time on the beautiful Adriatic coastline, then Croatia has become one of the most compelling options available. So the 3 EU options that I just told you about each have a different set of trade-offs on investment time and complexity. But there's one more country that I'm going to show you that doesn't fit any category that we've covered so far. In 2024, Turkey launched its digital nomad visa, and that's aimed at remote workers aged 21 to 55 with a university degree and $3,000 minimum of monthly income. You get 1 year initially, and that's renewable, and you can work either as an employee for a foreign company or you can run your own business registered outside Turkey. So apart from that, U.S. citizens can enter Turkey visa-free and stay for 90 days, and that gives you a good amount of time to explore before committing to a residency permit. This digital nomad visa is brand new and it's still evolving, but what's more established is Turkey Key's short-term residency permit, which you can get through what they call their EcoMat system, which runs anywhere from 6 months to 2 years depending on your situation. So to get that, you typically need proof of income, health insurance, and a lease or property ownership. Istanbul is where most people first land when they get to Turkey, and costs have gone up a lot in recent years, so you'd be looking at around $2,000 to $2,500 per month for living costs. Now, which is really a big jump from even 5 years ago due to inflation. Turkey Key's currency, the LRA, is very volatile at the moment, so that means your dollar can go further some months than others. So factor that in because it can be quite unpredictable. But the real draw of living in Turkey is the location. It really is excellent. You're just 2 hours from Europe, 2 hours from the Middle East, and you can even be in Central Asia in under 4 hours. Istanbul alone gives you 1 foot in Europe and 1 foot in Asia. Literally, you've got Roman ruins, Byzantine churches, Ottoman mosques, and a startup scene that is more and more connected to both European and Middle East markets. So, if you wanted to get permanent residency in Turkey, then you would need to live there for 8 years continuously. You could also consider citizenship by investment, which is currently a minimum of $400,000 in real estate. And some people do go down this road if they're serious about staying long-term, but the wild card element is really a thing here. Turkey's immigration policies are a bit unpredictable, especially in recent years. The economy does fluctuate a lot, and you're dealing with a country that is, genuinely bridging 2 worlds, which does bring both opportunities and uncertainties. So I know a lot of you watching this are probably feeling a genuine sense of urgency about the possibility of leaving the US, and I totally get it. I've been there years before with Brexit in the UK. Maybe it's political, maybe it's the economy, or maybe it's just the sense that you need to have options and a backup plan in place. That sense of urgency is valid, but it's also important to be strategic rather than reactive. Take some time to match your destination country to what you actually need. If you want maximum flexibility and low cost, then I recommend going for one of the year-long options that I talked about. But if you need a path to permanent residency, then focus on the countries that offer that as their clear next steps. And if EU access is your goal, then you've got 3 solid routes in this video with different trade-offs. The great thing is that none of these options need you to have everything figured out before you go. And that's the whole point of a landing pad, right? You get your foot in the door, you spend time on the ground, you get to know the place, and you make a longer-term decision based on what you actually experience. So because this can be confusing, I've put together a free comparison guide of all the countries that we talked about in this video with all the requirements, timelines, and costs, etc. side by side. So you can grab that for free from the link in the description. My advice would be pick the country that solves your most immediate problem and actually move. And I've also put links to all the official government sources in the description below, so feel free to check those out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.